In this video, we're going to show you how to build a northern flicker house. This house stands just under 20 inches tall, and it is pretty easy to make for the most part once you get the ornamental designs cut out. This video is for my father, who I'm sending a kit to out east where he lives, so he can build this on his own time. As a little bit of a Christmas present to him, is to give him a project. So we'll get started. All these plans come from this book, How to Attract House and Feed Birds by Walter Schultz. I found this book at a thrift store a long time ago. It is from the 70s, and the plans in here are pretty fast and loose, so they don't give a whole lot, but I'll try to go through each step-by-step instruction on how to cut each of these out. You can make each of these houses pretty easily out of a 1x12, 1x12 pine board, 1x12 by 8 foot long. So we'll get started on this flicker house and how to assemble it. So because I'm using all these boards to make 4 different houses overall, I used a cut list optimizer to kind of figure out each of these cuts and to waste the least amount of wood as possible. You can easily make one of these houses out of a 1x12 by 8 foot though. So these cuts here I'm making are just some of these cross cuts for the front and back and the sides. What you also see in here as well is probably a couple cuts for the titmouse house, which will be in a different video. So ripping the cuts, we're making these cross cuts. Each the top or the front of the house is going to stand about 18.5 inches in height, and then both sides are going to be 13 inches in height, and then the top is going to, or the back is going to be 15 inches tall, while the bottom is going to be about 5 3/4 inches. After a quick table saw blade change, which has been long overdue, I was able to rip down a lot of these cuts on the table saw. The first big one I'm doing is going to be for the titmouse house, but the rest of this board I ended up using for the flicker house, at least the vast majority of it anyways. So making these rip cuts, the width of the sides is about 6.5 inches, the width of the front is 6 3/4 inch, and the front face is about 9.5 inches, which is why you need a 1x12. You can probably get away with a 1x10 if you want to do a glue up, but for just being easy, I did it this way. A couple of those rips in on the table saw, just getting a lot of those pieces kind of sorted out and figured out between the 2 different types of houses that I'm building here. A few final cuts on the table saw before I move over to making my roof angles. These roof angles are about 60 degrees, so on the miter I set my angle to 30 degrees to make this that 60 degree angle. Didn't need to mark this all the way up like I did, but I did it anyways. After cutting these angles, I went ahead and measured out the area for the hole. The hole is about, the book says about 3.5 inches down from the peak of the roof there. So here I'm just marking that center, 3.5 inches down, before I move on to kind of figure out the size of the hole. And then I'm moving over to setting up a grid on these pieces that are in the book. Have you cut these down to about 10.5 inches, but then you cut those in half. So I'm making a grid to cut out these ornate pieces. I'm just taking my time to kind of eyeball the book and make my best guess at kind of freehanding how to make it look as close to the book illustration as possible. You could probably easily print this out. I'll put this in the PDF below, but I decided to freehand it. I'm just going to make one here, so then I'll use that one as a template for the other ornate pieces I'm going to make here. So I take this over to the bandsaw and then work on shaping it out on the belt sander. Now I'm just gonna draw these out onto those other pieces of stock that I have cut down. Again, the book says cut these at 10.5 inches in length, but then you're gonna chop those in half to have about 5.25 inch length of a piece here. So mark those out for all 2 of the birdhouses, and then I'm gonna take this to the bandsaw and work on shaping these. Now here's kind of the tricky part. The bottom of the flicker house has another design as well, but doesn't really show you how to cut it out. So I got a little creative and just felt like they looked really darn similar, and maybe that's how you're supposed to do it. But anyways, I just flipped those ornamental pieces upside down and traced them out from there, just best kind of measuring up that angle there, which is supposed to be about 60-degree angle moving up. So again, a little bit more eyeballing, a little bit more tracing, but at the end they all kind of turned out pretty good. So just took that over to the bandsaw, cut that out, and then I'm going to end up shaping that on the spindle sander as well to kind of smooth out any of those rough bumps that I get. So from here I move on to the table saw, set my angle to cut the roof, the bevels on the roof, which are 60-degree bevels, and so I'm turning my table saw to 30 degrees here and ripping off just to make that angle for my roof pieces. In a quick sanding, I don't think it's necessary, but you can sand these up to 120 grit. I just kind of sand these up to get rid of a lot of those pencil lines that I had. Dad, you're probably going to have to do this one yourself if you want your houses sanded. I did not pre-sand them for you. One of the very last things to cut out here are going to be your perch brackets. These are pretty easy. Again, they don't really give you a great pattern on this one, but this is about going to be 1 3/4 inches in width, and then it doesn't really tell you what angle to cut it down at, so or how big the bottom is supposed to be. So I just kind of cut off a little bit at the bottom, rounded off the edges here to make those perch brackets. So the hole in the perch bracket, they didn't really give me an idea there, so I ended up putting about 1 inch down and about 3/4 inches in. Felt pretty accurate for that. 1/4 inch drill bit, I'm drilling here, and then moving on to the next steps. And from here, I'm just drilling that 2.5 inch hole for the flicker entrance, which is measured at 3.5 inches is the center. Alright, so I got that. Dowel brackets. Again, these are 7 inches apart. The book gives no rhyme or reason or no idea where to put these. So, we're gonna eyeball it. Well, as you see in the book, much closer. And that 7 inches doesn't make sense because that's most of the way. So what we will do, again, this is flexible here. We'll do these at about 4.5 inches apart. So we'll mark a couple lines. Over 4.5 inches apart, we got a 9.5 inch piece. Now we do a little bit of math. So this comes out to about 3.5 or 2.5 in on each side. 2.5 in from each side. Make the math easy for you. It ain't easy for me. Put the bottoms. Okay, after a number of mistakes and a lot of disassembling and reassembling, I figured out what I did wrong. It was a bit. So I got everything pulled back apart, but I'll kind of show you what I did so far So far on the roof pieces, put about 1 inch back, put those eaves in so they match up with the angles on the roof. So when those get nailed on, things should fit in nicely, and we'll have those eaves kind of match up nicely on the front. The tops I got pre-nailed some nails. Use nails for all this. You can use screws or whatever else you would like. On the front, I put in, there's no measurements of where to put your brackets, so I just kind of eyeballed it, what the picture looked like. So from the bottom up, the bottom of the brackets are 7 inches, and then they're about 2.5 inches in from each side. So 2.5 and then 7 inches up. And then as prior, drilled the hole 2.5 inches. The book says 2 inches. I didn't have a 2-inch hole saw or bit, but the internet says 2.5 inches will work for flicker houses. So we did have a 2.5-inch hole saw. So we got 2.5 inches, again 7 up, and then 2.5 inches from the sides to here. So I'll put this together, kind of show you how. We start with the back. And we use nails again for all this, but you can use whatever you want, I would assume. So I'm going to start with nailing in the back sides here, and I'm going to put the front on and go from there.
I bet you're telling yourself that there's no way he could continue to mess this up and pull apart again for a second time. Well, you'd be wrong, because I did have to do that. What I ended up doing was I cut one of the side pieces is a hair too short. I thought, well, I'll just compensate that by cutting the back a little bit short as well. That didn't really work out too great, because then my roof didn't really sit very evenly across the top there. So if you stick to the measurements in the plans, things should work out okay. If you cut one of the side pieces, hair too short, that's probably okay. I kept this film in here because it looked pretty good, and by the time I was coming around to putting it back together, I ended up just forgetting to start the camera. So I put 3 nails in at each of the butt joints there after lining everything up. Easiest way to figure out how these go together is probably just putting down the base piece and building the house around the base. So everything you can see how everything lines up before you start nailing, which was my first mistake that I made. So again, 3 nails on each of those front butt joints, and then the roof here, we're doing 2 nails on the front for each roof side and 2 nails on the back for each roof side. Again, if you do screws to this, I would pre-drill your holes so it doesn't split.
The bottom's going to fit in, just like so. However, we want you to round off the ends there to help with the pivot. So, I'm going to not take it to the belt sander. I'm going to plug in a battery.
And just so this bottom pivots here, I am pre-drilling a couple holes to pop in a couple of screws I chose to do just to help that hinge out a little bit. You can use a little knob or whatever you want about it. I'm just using a spare screw to kind of just aid with that assembly piece there, so I can hold on to the screw as I drill the holes and the screws into the bottom.
Put a screw right here. Also aid with cleanout. So finish up the house. Putting a 1/4 inch dowel. Just tap it lightly with that through the holes there. And tight it all together. So when you want to clean that out, you just undo the bottom screw here, and you pull it out from the bottom. You can clean it out. Overall, an easy project if you follow things quick and easy enough. Again, this is from a book that's from the 70s, so some of it was a little bit of eyeballing and just figuring it out as you go along. But if you follow things well, you put in the back into the right way, everything else should line up just fine, and you're ready to finish it and put it in a tree.